Ascends at Boston Avenue podcast. My name is Philip Boone. I'm the Mid-High and Confirmation Director here at Boston Avenue. And today's co-host is Caitlin Dryke, who is the Communication Director here at Boston Avenue.
Hi, Philip.
Hey, Caitlin. And today's guest is Jennifer Solis, one of my really good friends, who is the Director of Family and Children's Ministries at St. Paul's United Methodist Church and the Special Education Teacher at Tulsa Public Schools. How are you doing, Jennifer?
I'm doing great. How are you guys today?
We're doing well. To start off with, I want you to tell us a little bit about your faith journey.
That's a big question. I think it's hard to talk about my faith journey without also talking about the intersection of my life within like the institutional United Methodist Church. So my family is multi-generational Methodist, multi-generational Boston Avenue. My grandparents became members at Boston Avenue in 1948. And I am a third-generation Boston Avenuer, and I'm raising a fourth-generation Boston Avenuer who is in elementary school. So for all of my life, you know, this local Methodist church has been our church. When we're in Tulsa, this is where we go. Very much important to structuring and forming not only my Christian identity, but my deep roots in Wesleyanism.
So how did you hop from being a Boston Avenue member to working at St. Paul's? You know, how did you make that transition?
Sure. I started feeling called and pulled to ministry, honestly, before I really knew that that's what it was. Even as a child, I had inklings and nudgings and things that I recognize now as being part of the call. But when I was in high school, I started working with middle school youth, and it was through that process and developing that leadership and having the nurture and the mentorship of people in this community that I discovered those gifts and talents and started pursuing that further. So I, at that point, got an undergraduate degree in religion from the University of Tulsa. And then following getting that degree, I had gone through the official discernment and declaration process for ordination within the United Methodist Church and had picked St. Paul's School of Theology in Kansas City and had decided to pursue seminary education there. And so I graduated from the University of Tulsa and moved to Kansas City for 6 months because it did not go as planned.
What happened? Tell us about what happened. I mean, I know that's a much deeper story.
Sure. I found myself in the wrong place at the wrong time in the wrong city at the wrong time of year in the wrong program with the wrong people, basically. It was really one of those interesting things where by doing something I needed to do and having really uncomfortable and not great experiences, I learned more than I ever could have by being successful at something. So at the time, St. Paul's, this was back at the old campus that was not on the campus of Church of the Resurrection. It was on the Truman Road campus. It was the second youngest seminary in the United Methodist Connection. The average age of students was like 24 or 25. Most of us were coming out of, directly out of an undergrad program. Again, I was far from home, and my support network really wasn't that great, but I ended up literally and figuratively having the Book of Discipline thrown at me. So
by the professors?
No, it was
by other students.
So what had basically happened was I was forcefully outed without knowing it was going to happen, and it created a lot of tension within certain groups of students and different things. And I was in an ethics class at the time, and shocking, I know. I had like ethics and Hebrew Bible, and I can't even remember what the other thing was, but I was in this ethics class that was a really awesome class. And right before I left for Kansas City, I had been the youth director at Trinity United Methodist Church in Tulsa as well. And the majority of the staff was LGBTQ. So it was just like our thing, right? So in this ethics class, the professor had asked this hypothetical question of, can a Methodist church hire a gay person to be the music director? And all 22 years of me was feeling very smug and confident because, ooh, I know this. This is not hypothetical. We just did this. And she gave us the scenario, gave us our books, gave us our resources, and told us to go work as a group and come up with your answer and then cite it and be able to present to the class. So we're working on this and we're having our conversation, and somebody says, well, I know the answer to that. That's a no. I just fired one of those people, but he did not say those people. He said another inflammatory word.
Wow.
And the people in my group, I wasn't really the one that was like inciting the riot, but I was along for the ride. Was like, no, here, we'll open the book of discipline and we'll open this other stuff and we'll show you where you can find it. It says nothing about laity. It says nothing about staff people. It's all about ordination. So you shouldn't have fired your friendly youth director or music director. And this friend of mine handed the guy the book, and as he was reading the paragraphs in the discipline that only pertained to ordination, you could see him like visibly getting more and more and more upset. And there got to that like critical mass kind of level where he knew he was wrong, and he was mad, upset, probably embarrassed that he'd, done that in a classroom. And he gathered up all of his stuff to leave, and he's storming out of the room, and he's really mad. And as he's leaving the classroom, he throws the book of discipline backwards, and it just happened to hit me in the head on his way out the door. So, I'd been outed. I'd had a relationship that ended, and then I was hit in the head with church polity. And I went to bed that night, and I woke up with the phrase evil, injustice, and oppression on a loop in my brain in a cold sweat. And I sat up and was like, I have to get out of here. Like, this is wrong. This is not what I've been called to do. I'm not exactly sure how to keep company with these people who are also, most of them are local student pastors or local pastors. Like, how do I stay in this place with these people who have the same call as I do that are treating people so horribly? And it was in that moment that I also realized that I wasn't going to make it through the process. So I could stay and I could be miserable and I could see it ending really poorly, or I could leave. And I left.
And you've returned to seminary since then.
Yes, almost 10 years to the day later. I made the decision to go back to Phillips in Tulsa, which is a known progressive environment. And it's been a good move. The interesting thing is this time there's so many different barriers that are gone. I'm not constrained to time. I'm not constrained to the process. I'm still declared as a United Methodist student. I'm still taking United Methodist classes in addition to all the other things they require. But there's the freedom in being authentic. There's the freedom in when I walked in to apply and everything else, there were people that already knew who I was and how I was working in the world.
So a much more positive experience.
It is, but I still don't know why I'm there. So I just keep showing up and putting one foot in front of the other. And we'll see. When I went back a couple of years ago, the only way I could explain it was there's a timing to it that I don't understand. Like, now means something, and here I go. And that's pretty much been a lot of my life, is just listening to the nudge and the pull and the call and doing a lot of leaping on blind faith.
So after you left Kansas City, after you left St. Paul, where did you go to from there? Could you continue your journey to where you are now?
Well, I went home and I laid in my bed in my mother's house for about 6 months and chewed on some antidepressants and really struggled with what to do and where to go and how to integrate back.
Were you questioning your calling around that time?
No, I've never questioned.
You never questioned?
I've never questioned my call, and I've never questioned my faith, and that's a really complicating thing in this situation. My faith in God and my ability to believe and trust has never wavered. My faith and my ability to believe and trust in the institutional church has died repeated deaths and keeps doing that. And I find it very ironic or fascinating, but also traumatic and painful that the same thing that taught me how to survive adversity and the same thing that taught me how to be who I am is the same thing that attacks and maims and injures and harms. So it's this, constant standing and holding and working and living in the tension of, I'm called to this work, which is also a calling to perpetuate a system of harm as it currently stands. And I struggle very much with that, especially in my work with children and youth. I try very hard to make environments for children and youth that are safe and welcoming and affirming, and doing that within the institutional United Methodist Church sometimes feels really wrong, and it feels like a lie, and I know that I'm bringing young people into a system that will not always welcome and affirm them, but then at the same time looking in the long run and looking at their lives holistically. It's not about the church, it's about grounding them in faith, and that is something that at least they'll come back to when they need it.
And also differentiating the institution of the church with St. Paul's UMC, which is a reconciling. So they can go to St. Paul's UMC and feel loved and accepted and included, but that's not also the same thing as the institution of the church. Like, there's a dissonance there.
Yeah, definitely. So I mean, there's a lot of things that you get into with language and naming and what you call it and how you function, right? So St. Paul's on Cherry Street in Tulsa is a reconciling congregation, which means about 10 years ago they were Tulsa's first reconciling congregation. So they made the decision to actually, as a church community, work through a process to decide if they would be open and affirming. So what that means is they don't just say you can come here and sit in our pews. They allow folks of all identities, socioeconomic status, race, gender, all of those kind of things. It is boldly stated that you can come here and we will put you in leadership, and you can teach our kids, and you can read from the pulpit, and you can do all the things. That being said, if you're like me and you end up being the queer kid born into the Methodist Church, you can be called to ministry, you can't pursue it. You can't get married within the doors by someone who's raised you. There are still those barriers that even in a reconciling community
You can't cross.
you have to face, yeah.
Now that you're in ministry, what challenges do you find within church communities around inclusion?
I mean, we talked about, you can't, within the Methodist Church, get married, or you can't be ordained.
Sure.
But particularly outside of St. Paul's even, what are those challenges around inclusion? What are ways that churches aren't being as inclusive or maybe could be?
So what I found through my personal experiences, especially in this part of the country, is that there are a lot of people that really like the idea of diversity and inclusion, and they consider themselves to be progressive and affirming and inclusive. And their ideas and their ideologies and even their theologies are probably
In the right place.
all of those things. I would completely say and affirm that. But theology is not a concept, and it's not a belief, and it's not an ideology that you hold. It's a lived practice, right? So when you say I hold this idea, is how you're behaving, is how you live that out reflective of your ideas. And what I found is that even the most well-meaning, well-educated, highly progressive people have areas where they need to grow in their cultural competency and understanding of difference to be able to actively live that out. I see that through dress codes. I see that through the ways invitations to things are written. I see that in the way churches write like applications or childcare forms or signups for camps. I see that in gendered language. I see a lot of that in one of the big clues for me when I visit a church or when I go to do work at a certain place is listening to the words that they use in their worship setting reflects a lot of how they choose to live out their identity. And as a person who has multiple layers of otherness, I enter into community spaces, I enter into religious spaces, I enter into workspaces with, I would say, a different lens and a sensitivity to what inclusion fully looks like. As a special ed teacher, that's what I do 65 hours a week. I'm always pushing to include people into a world that was not built for them. You know, people who have learning disabilities. The public school is not set up for people whose brain works differently. Kiddos in wheelchairs. The world was not set up for people on wheels. I feel that way about religious space pretty broadly, and specifically in the Methodist Church. The Methodist Church was not set up for people who experience large amounts of otherness. There's this the great Wesleyan tradition of disciplines and doing things the same way, and routines and things that build your spiritual practice. But in a way, I think that also has encouraged us over time to box ourselves in and not allow that space for difference.
I think there's a lot of, both within the Methodist Church and I think just the institution of church at large, by nature of being an institution, the way things have always been done is how you keep doing things.
Sure.
Because that's just the nature of the structure.
And that's another tension I live in. As a third generation in Boston Avenue, or as raising a fourth generation, there's things that I love. You know, there are third grade Bibles. I mean, 3 generations of my family have stood at the same altar and got a third grade Bible. 3 generations of my family have been given a hymnal for choir. The last 4 generations of my family have been married and had their funerals on the same spot in the Rose Chapel. You know, there are traditions that pull you in and create these thin spaces within the building where you're like, this is home, and this is safe, and this is right. But then there's also that through the tradition and through the different things that we do. You know, we're really great about teaching theology with music and doing that to kids from a young age where they can sing their faith. Well, that also imprints a theology into your heart and into your soul and into your mind in a way that when you get older and you're like me, and you're called to do something and then are told you don't belong there, it brings into that question of like, did you not mean the words of my baptism? Is this theology that you taught me as a child not true? So God's love is for everyone, if and only but it, you know. So there's this like, there's a tension and there's a pain to, you know, we teach this as universal truth, and it currently is not a universal truth.
And you talked about where people's heart can be in the right place and they can really think about being inclusive in ways, but sometimes their verbiage or their words and the way they act don't always match that. And that's one thing that I think people need to think about is, as a straight male, I don't always necessarily think, oh, wait a minute, that wasn't as inclusive as it could be. So like, I've gone to you personally and said, can you please, what's a better way for this to be more inclusive? And so to reach out to your LGBTQ friends, and because you've always been willing to say, this is what we can do, because the person is trying to be better,
right,
in their words. So it's important to know it's okay to ask questions. It's okay to say, how can I be more inclusive? What are ways I can say this? Because I don't think this is the right way to say it.
Right.
So it's okay to ask questions, because you always liked that I would ask questions and try to become more inclusive.
Right. And that's another way of, you know, my faith journey and living into my identity and my calling. If you had asked 8-year-old Jennifer if they would be the person who enjoys being the weird kid on the playground, 8-year-old Jennifer would have said, no, never. Like, I want to be normal, and I want to be like everybody else, and I don't want anybody to know that I'm different. And as an adult, I'm really realizing that part of my God-given created identity, part of my God-given created gifts and God-given created queerness is that I'm been put in multiple places and multiple positions to be able to teach and lead. And that's why I go into spaces. I'm like, please ask, please do it respectfully, but please ask me, because there are other people that don't want to be asked and they just want to live their best life and don't want to have to teach all the time. And so for me, a large part of, my Christian calling is to be that advocate.
It's kind of the flip part of this conversation. We talk a lot about how difficult it can be within the institution of the church to identify as LGBTQ and authentically bring your whole self into the church and be included and affirmed and really integrated into the church with your whole identity. But what about within the LGBTQ community? Is it challenging to be a Christian within that community? And is that also part of your calling or your journey?
Sure. It's incredibly difficult. Religion in general is a very difficult thing in the LGBTQ community. Predominantly Christian traditions. And that just stems from so many different denominations that do so much harm. I talked a little bit ago about how, we imprint affirming theology on children's hearts with our songs and our stories and those kind of things. There are a lot of traditions that also imprint some really scary and damaging and negative theologies on children's hearts, so that from the time they're very small, they're being told that they're worthless and that God doesn't love them and that they need to rot or they shouldn't have been born or those kind of things. And if you think about, the way I hope people would talk to their children, and tell them like, hey, I think you're a great person. I love who you are. You're so creative. You can only imagine when you hear that message over and over and over and over again, you believe it. So you get a lot of people that tend to compartmentalize at best, reject at worst, lose faith, or just find themselves safer in a non-religious environment. And to me, as a member of both communities, I think all of those responses are valid. The harm is real, the trauma is real, the continued struggle to live in a community like Oklahoma that's very religion is such a part of culture and community and society, and to live in a way where you're not only rejected in religious terms but rejected in community terms. When I walk in and I'm like, hi, I'm this, person that does all these things, I'm often greeted with mistrust. It takes a while for members of the LGBTQ community to really realize that I'm not there to tell them to come back to church. I'm not there to criticize or belittle them for the choices that they've made. Really, how I work in the world is I hope that I am teaching people about this good news that we want to bring other people back to through the way I live. And for me, if that means being the one Christian or the one person with a title connected to a church that, has welcomed a child with 2 moms into a Sunday school, if that's all I can do to make the church relevant to their lives, that's enough.
What do you wish people knew about LGBTQ people of faith?
That they're not as magical, unicorny as people want to think. I think that it's often seen as like, oh, gay and Christian, never, or
it's not an oxymoron.
It just can't happen. Yes. No, I think almost every queer person in Oklahoma has touched a religious community in one way or another. You don't get to pick what kind of family or community or church that you're born into. You also don't get to pick who you are. So, but again, I think that at the heart of that is it goes back to be truly inclusive. There's a need for faith communities to practice intentional inclusivity for LGBTQ Christians. And that's typically the step that I don't see people taking. It's that understanding that church is hard. And it's that understanding that people carry baggage. And it's that understanding that, our families may not look like yours, but they're still as valid. And it's that piece of if you truly want to be inclusive, you're going to have to step out of some privilege, step aside, and make yourself intentionally uncomfortable to be intentionally inclusive. And that's really important. And I think that's the piece that is so often forgotten. It's like, oh, I'll be inclusive, but I'm not going to take any of the struggle on. So what I really feel there should be is a move in mindset and a move in practice from working for inclusivity to working for solidarity. Solidarity being the model of nothing for us without us. When you think about it in the concept of like mission work, Boston Avenue is so great about doing mission work that stands alongside and works in partnership with communities. There are other churches and other denominations that feel like it's their calling to go in and be the savior of another people and to, give them what we think they need. When you look at that in the framework of what do LGBTQ Christians need in the church, it's the same thing. We need the present church community to come alongside in solidarity. Don't make decisions for us without us. Don't have giant conferences and gatherings with hundreds of people and only invite 12 queer people. Like the voices of the LGBTQ faith community should be central when those are the issues that we're discussing.
Where do you find hope for the future, both of the inclusive church? Is there hope?
There's always hope. I think that sometimes hope looks like death, and it doesn't always feel like hope when it looks like death. But in that, we're Easter people, and we believe in resurrections, and I have felt that from the beginning. My big struggle, I was present at General Conference when the votes went down and those kind of things happened. And for me, being at General Conference was more of it was this weird, backwards, affirming, good, painful, traumatic thing because people that were not LGBTQ got to see the church function the way that I have experienced it my whole life. Mm-hmm. So in that, even though it was painful and even though it broke people in this way that I will never understand or be able to fully hold or comprehend, we called it and we named it and we looked at it and we said, this is bad and let's quit trying to keep the status quo and let's seriously take a look at what we're doing. The hope is found in the fact that more people are seeking conversations. The hope is found in this podcast is happening. The hope is found in the number of churches that have proclaimed reconciling status since General Conference. The hope is
the number of individuals that have,
and the number of people. And so it's that you name it and then you can claim it. But even still, I don't also want to just fly on hope because sometimes hope gets weary. And especially in this movement where you look at LGBTQ people in the church and the way that spiritual harm impacts people's mental health and impacts their personal lives, this is life or death for a lot of people. And so, yes, there's always hope. Do I believe that there will be good people leading a resistance movement against the traditional plan that will keep going forward? Yes, I do. I completely believe that. Do I believe that structures and policies will change in a way that will fully include and affirm all LGBTQ people? Maybe. I think that there are people that will work towards that. The big concern that I have is that church polity doesn't change practice and hearts. And so I don't want people to find the hope in, we passed a new, we made a new thing. We've made the new UMC. Everybody's going to be welcome. The new thing isn't going to welcome and include the people in the new thing. Will welcome and include. And if they keep doing the hard work, which as we've seen over the last couple of months, there are lots of people doing really hard work, that will continue to push forward a more inclusive denomination.
What is the most important thing people of faith can do to support our LGBTQ neighbors?
I think, again, it's that movement from working to include and affirm to working to be in solidarity. It's to center and focus on LGBTQ people, center and focus on people of color, different things like that, where it's not the traditional power structure that has been in the United Methodist Church, because that's a lot of what we're also up against, is we have the same people who look like each other speaking for people who don't look like them or live like them or have the same needs as them making decisions. So I think it's really, really important to seek to be in solidarity and community with LGBTQ people of faith.
What does a full vision of inclusion look like to you? The full vision of inclusion, if it was what you ever wanted, what would it look like?
In special education, we have a concept that's called universal design. And universal design is the concept that when you create a lesson or you set up your classroom, you create it so that anyone on any ability with any skill level can access that lesson. It's different from differentiating a lesson, because when you differentiate, you make everybody their own little special thing so they have what they need. And they have to go to the special place to get the special thing at the whatever. With universal design, it was created with all people in mind. It was created with people, it was created with others in mind. It wasn't just the vision of the person that already existed. And I would say that that's what's really needed for the church, for the United Methodist Church and the church as a whole, is to think through a lens of universal design. Universal design is really the theology of God created us all as we are. God gifted us with our difference and our abilities and our skills and our talents. So we should be able to navigate the world and access our communities from who we are. We shouldn't have to go to the separate classroom to get the special resource. We shouldn't have to go to a special church for our families and our identities to be included or affirmed. We shouldn't have to, have the special liturgy at the, communion service that includes words that affirm our family. So for me, a fully inclusive church is one that everyone can access physically, through language and through lived practice is what I really think it comes down to.
Do you have any other thoughts or, final message that you would want to share?
I mean, I have lots of thoughts all the time. I'm never out of thoughts. I'm really thankful to just have the platform to be able to share my thoughts and experiences. I think I'm just like a lot of other people in this right now, is I'm just in the struggle. I was recently in Minneapolis at the Art Movement Forward gathering, and it was interesting because, I knew people that had come, but there were a lot of people that I'd never met before. And, you sit down at a table with your, church coffee and your cookie, and you go, hey, why are you here? And my answer was always, I don't know, I just keep showing up. Because that's really the best I can do right now. And it's the call to show up and the call to do the work and the call to do what I can, and not really knowing how it's going to end. I know how I would like it to end. I don't know if I have any, power or control over that, but I just keep showing up and being who I am in the spaces that I am called to be in, and the rest is not up to me.
Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
This has been the Ascends at Boston Avenue podcast. We're located at 1301 South Boston. Please visit our Facebook page, Instagram page, Twitter page for more information about our church. Come to our website if you would like to come on Sunday mornings. We will talk to you later. Bye.